In this exercise, we're going to be doing pivot sort with tests in Ruby. So let's start off by creating a folder to work in, a directory, and we'll call it pivot sort. And we'll start off with a spec, a test, using our spec here. So we'll just put in some quick boilerplate code just to get it running. Make sure that we can run a test. And there it is, and it passes. That's good. So now let's put some actual code in there. Let's say that we're looking at a little array 1, 2, 3, and our pivot sort on that array should return the same array unchanged. And in this example, I'm going to include the application code right here instead of separately and requiring relative for it, just for the sake of this exercise. So we're going to have pivot sort. We pass it the array, and we pass back the array, and the test passes the minimum amount to pass the test. Let's just make sure we don't get a false positive. You can get a false positive. Test fails if it's not that. So that's good. All right. So let's know our next test. So this was for this is for pivot searches, and the first one is for a pre-sorted array, and the next one is for an unsorted. Actually, let's call it to be specific and call it a reverse sorted array. So there we go. 3, 2, 1 should return 1, 2, 3, and now that fails as expected. All right. So now we actually need to do some work here. So we pivot around a point, and then we're going to go along the array, and for each element that we look at, we're going to compare that element to the pivot point. So we're going to ask if that element is less than or equal to the pivot point, the pivot value, then we want to make this new thing, accumulate it a new left, adding that one character onto it. Otherwise, we want to add that character to the right, because we're going to be putting in a pivot, you put things either to the left or to the right. So that's, and then we want to return our new left plus our new right. It's going to be our new array that's been pivoted. And as usual, I've messed up my indentation. This should actually have an end here. Let me fix all of that. There we go. Okay. So pivot value, oh sorry, that wasn't defined. Let's just pivot around position 1 for the small 3 character array. That's actually the middle of it, 0, 1, 2. And we need to account for the fact that we want to look at pivot value. So I'm going to put that as our first element there. Okay, this is because I haven't defined left and right. So let's do that. And here, because I'm adding to an array, I'll use that symbol to let me get around that. And it's actually left and right, not new left and new right. And it's returning an array, and that's quite common with me. I forget to put that final return to return the value. And then the result hasn't been used outside of the block, so we needed to set the result to be left plus pivot value plus right. Okay, we've got one extra here because if we're comparing to itself, then we shouldn't be including that. We're only swapping with other positions, so other characters. So those two passed for very, very small, simple arrays. And now we want a jumbled up array. We're just going to go with no dupes, just to keep making it easy. But we're going to make it about 8 elements long. And this array should look a little bit hard to figure that out. 9 at the end should look like that. And you can see that it doesn't, which is kind of interesting. And this is where I decided that it's not just one pivot. We need to do multiple pivots, and the way I've approached that is to to go along the array, changing the pivot point. So start from the beginning, or at least one character in, and go up to the size of the array. And for each element, treat it as a pivot point and do the pivot sort around that point. Maybe pivot sort is not quite the right term there, because this is really the pivot sort. And return the modified source. So now, if we use the all pivots, which calls pivot sort, now that result should be what we wanted. So let's try running that. It's not quite, because we're changing the pivot point, but we're not passing it in. So let's pass that into pivot sort and run that. And that's almost right, but a couple aren't right there, and that's because I passed it in, but I didn't actually use it. So let's actually get the code using it here. All right, there we go. That passes. All right, so that was a medium jumbled up, no dupes. Now let's go for a longer array that has duplicates. Make sure it handles that correctly. So let's give it quite a few values here. It's about 15 or 20 numbers in this array. And scanning through it, it's a little bit hard to figure it out, but I think I don't have to get it too perfect. I think it should roughly be like this. Let's try that, see if the length is even right. Yep, that's right, and that was actually worked. And then one thing. Oh, that's it. There we go. Thank you.